Hello everybody. Now let's see, we'll do another chapter of the dear old Briar Patch this morning. And as you can see, it still is morning by the clock. Okay, chapter 7. The secret is out. Now let's see now. There's a picture of one of the rabbits in the old Briar Patch. There's another picture. There's both of them, Peter and Mrs. Peter. Looks like the moon up there in the sky, doesn't it? And some stars. Well, we'll see what happens. Let's see. Few secrets ever are kept so well, but accident or time will tell. That's from old Mother Nature. Mrs. Peter never will forget the night her precious secret was almost discovered by accident. As she lay nursing her 6 babies in the snug nest in the grass out there on the green meadows, she heard a faint rustling in the grass. Someone, stepping softly, was coming. Oh, my word. Wait a minute. Is that Granny and Reddy Fox? Oh, my gosh. I bet it is. She held her breath as she listened. In a moment, her worst fears were realized as Reddy Fox and Mrs. Reddy appeared. Mrs. Reddy, not Granny. They sat down so near that the tip of Reddy's tail was almost near enough to tickle her nose. "Do you know what I would like?" said Reddy. "I know a lot of things you would like if you could get them." "What is it this time?" replied Mrs. Reddy. "Some young rabbits, just for a change from mice," said Reddy. "I would myself," agreed Mrs. Reddy. "Mrs. Peter should have some babies about now, but if she has, they probably are over in the old Briar Patch. How I do hate those brambles." "No more than do I," replied Reddy. "Let's go over to the old Briar Patch. We haven't been there for some time. It might be worthwhile to look around there a bit. If Mrs. Peter has a nest, it may be near enough to the edge for us to find it. I certainly would like a dinner of tender young rabbits." Oh, my word. He smacked his lips, and Mrs. Peter shivered. What if they should start to nose about in the grass in the hope of finding a mouse? Her nose was filled with the strong, unpleasant fox smell. It seemed to her that her heart thumped loud enough to be heard. "Come on," said Mrs. Reddy. Even if we do not find a nest, there may be some young bunnies running about. Mice are good eating, but a couple of young rabbits would be better." Once more Mrs. Peter shivered. Then it seemed to her that her heart almost stopped beating. "While we are here," said Reddy, "we may as well look around for mice." "It would be a waste of time," replied Mrs. Reddy. "Now that you have reminded me of young rabbits, I am not hungry for mice. The sooner we look around the old Briar Patch, the better." "Just as you say, my dear," replied Reddy, getting to his feet. "There's nothing to lose by looking. Young rabbits." He smacked his lips, and again Mrs. Peter shivered. Then she drew a long breath as the dangerous neighbors moved away. So the anxious days and happy nights passed till the babies were 2 weeks old, as cute bunnies as ever wobbled cute little noses. Now their eyes were open. They soon would be ready to go out to see what the great world was like. Watching over them from a distance by day and mothering them by night, Mrs. Peter had known a strange mingling of dreadful anxiety and wonderful happiness, and she had kept her secret. "I was wise to make my nursery way out on the green meadows," she would often say to herself. "It's the safest place I could have found. No one thinks of looking for it, so far from the dear old Briar Patch. The only danger is that someone may find it by accident." Even that danger seemed about over now that the babies were almost ready to come home to the dear old Briar Patch. Alas, how little we can foresee. How often things of which we have never dreamed happen. Early one morning, as Mrs. Peter sat planning how she would lead the babies home that night, she was startled by a whirring, clacking sound. Somehow it was familiar, but she couldn't remember what made it. "I've heard that before," thought she, "but I can't think what makes it. Anyway, it comes from a long way off, so I guess there is no cause for worry." For a while she thought no more of it. Then she became aware that it was louder. That meant it was nearer. She hopped to the lower end of the old Briar Patch and peeped out. At once she saw what was making that noise. A mowing machine. Farmer Brown's boy had begun cutting the grass for hay. At first she watched without fear. That thing never came into the old Briar Patch. She had seen it summer after summer. It had never harmed her or Peter. She had heard that Carol the meadowlark and Bubbling Bob the bobolink, do you hear that? Bubbling Bob the bobolink, jeez, had had nests destroyed by that thing, or by the horses that pulled it. But she had given little heed to these tales. After a while, she noticed that every time that thing came around, it was a little nearer to where the precious babies were. What if he should cut the grass around that hidden nursery? Panic filled her at the thought. There was no doubt about it. That noisy thing passed a little nearer to those helpless little bunnies every time it came around. Perhaps it would stop before it reached them. If it didn't, what was she to do? What could she do? She hopped out into the open and sat up. Whir, whir, clickety clack went the machine behind the plodding horses. The tall grass fell before the knives of the cutter bar. The standing grass grew less and less. Mrs. Peter had had many frights in her life, but never one like this. Never had she felt so helpless. Frantically, she began to run about. Several times she started to go to those babies, only to turn back in fright as that dreadful machine drew near. She had thought of the other dangers that might threaten her babies out there on the green meadows, but not of this. Now that fearful thing was heading straight for the place where those helpless babies lay. Mrs. Peter closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was no longer tall grass around that nursery. Those dreadful clacking knives had cut it. What had happened to those helpless little rabbits? Do you wonder that their mother was frantic? The machine had stopped, and Farmer Brown's boy was getting down from it. Now, Farmer Brown's boy never is forgetful of his friends and neighbors in fur and feathers. He knew how often nests on the ground with eggs or young birds are unintentionally destroyed during haying, so he kept watch ahead for the sudden rising of a frightened bird who might have a nest hidden in the grass. Then he could lift the cutter bar and so save the nest. Because of this watchfulness, he had discovered Mrs. Peter just outside the dear old briar patch, when still some distance away. The first time he noticed her, she was sitting up watching. Suddenly, she turned and dashed back into the briar patch. The little lady doesn't know what to make of this noisy thing, said he. To her, it must be a monster. Probably she will keep out of sight now. But the next time around, there she was. This time she didn't run. She was there the next time and the next. The fifth time around, she dashed out of the grass just ahead of the horses and off to one side. She stopped, turned as if to run back, hesitated, ran to one side and stopped again. She acted as if she didn't know what to do, as indeed she didn't. A puzzled look crept over the freckled face of Farmer Brown's boy. He stopped the horses. "What ails that rabbit?" he muttered. "She acts scared half to death. If she is as frightened as all that, why doesn't she go back in the briar patch?" He clucked to the horses. Once more the whir and clack of the mower filled the air. Farmer Brown's boy was still puzzling over Mrs. Peter's odd behavior when he caught sight of something brown under the fallen grass where the knives had just passed. At once he thought of a nest. He stopped the horses and jumped down. He lifted off the fallen grass from a flattened handful or two of dry grass. His first thought was that this was all, some dead grass that had become lodged there. Then he noticed some fur in the grass. He lifted the grass and gave a low whistle of surprise. Lying flat, close together, were 6 little brown babies, 6 little bunnies, with little ears laid back and soft, frightened eyes. They were so still that but for those eyes he might have thought them dead. Anxiously he picked them up, one by one. Some squealed. All kicked. Farmer Brown's boy let out a long breath of relief. Not one of them was hurt. No one had been so much as touched. He looked over at the cutter bar with its shining knives and wondered. It didn't seem possible it could have passed over them without killing, or at least badly hurting some of them, but it had. He shook his head. "I don't see how all of you managed to escape," said he. Then those 6 bunnies proceeded to show him just how they had escaped. As fast as he put them down, they crept into the snug nest and flattened themselves close together with their funny little ears laid flat back. They just filled that nest, but not so much as the tip of a little ear was above the level of the ground. When that blanket of grass and fur over them... I'm sorry, I got to read that sentence again, everybody. With that blanket of grass and fur over them, there was still nothing for those sharp knives to touch. Despite the fright they had had from the noise of that machine and the feet of the horses passing so close, they had heeded what Mother had taught them. They had kept perfectly still. That evening, 6 little white tails behind one bigger one bobbed through the soft dusk straight to the dear old briar patch. Mrs. Peter's secret was out, but now she didn't care. And that's the end of that chapter. Well, chapter 8 comes up next. Okay, everybody. See you later. Bye-bye.